The house at 13 Willow Street had always been a topic of whispered conversations in the small town of Rivertown. For years, it had stood abandoned, a decrepit and overgrown structure shrouded in mystery and dread. Rumors about the house were rife. Some claimed it was cursed, while others believed it was haunted by vengeful spirits. No one dared to venture near it after dark, and the townsfolk avoided the street altogether. But all of that changed when the Jacobs family arrived in Rivertown. Desperate for a fresh start, they purchased the house on Willow Street, unaware of the horrors that lay within its walls. The Jacobs family, Mark, Sarah, and their two children, Emily and Daniel, had been through a series of misfortunes. They had lost their home, their jobs, and their sense of security in the wake of a financial crisis. When they stumbled upon the house on Willow Street, it seemed like a lifeline. The price was unbelievably low, and it offered the promise of a fresh start. Mark, an optimistic man by nature, saw it as an opportunity to rebuild their lives. As they moved into their new home, the Jacobs family brushed aside the warnings and superstitions of the townsfolk. Little did they know that the house held secrets that would soon engulf them in a nightmare they could never have imagined. The first night in their new home was filled with a sense of unease. Strange sounds echoed through the house, whispers in the walls, distant footsteps, and eerie creaks that seemed to have no origin. Sarah, ever the pragmatic one, attributed the sounds to the old house settling. Mark assured her that they would get used to it, and the children, tired from the move, fell into fitful sleep. But as the days turned into weeks, the whispers in the walls grew more pronounced. Emily claimed she heard voices in her room at night, and Daniel insisted that his toys moved on their own. Mark and Sarah couldn't deny the unsettling atmosphere that pervaded their home, and the sense of dread that had once surrounded the house on Willow Street began to seep into their lives. One day, while exploring the house, Emily discovered a hidden door in the basement. The door, concealed behind a shelf, led to a small windowless room. Its walls were covered in faded, cryptic symbols, and an old dusty mirror hung on one side. The moment Emily stepped into the room, an overwhelming sense of unease washed over her. She felt as if she were being watched by countless unseen eyes. She quickly left, vowing never to return. But the hidden room had awakened something dormant within the house, something malevolent. From that day on, the whispers in the walls grew louder, and the sense of foreboding deepened. As weeks turned into months, the Jacobs family found themselves trapped in a nightmare of unexplained phenomena. Objects moved on their own, footsteps echoed through the empty hallways, and chilling drafts swept through the house even on the warmest days. Emily and Daniel, once full of enthusiasm for their new home, grew withdrawn and fearful. They spoke of shadowy figures that lurked in the corners of their rooms and of voices that whispered terrifying secrets in the dead of night. Mark and Sarah, desperate to protect their children, sought the help of experts and paranormal investigators. But each attempt to unravel the mystery only seemed to provoke the malevolent force that had taken hold of their house. Dr. Elizabeth Chambers, a renowned paranormal investigator, arrived in Rivertown after hearing about the Jacobs family's plight. She had dedicated her life to studying the unexplained, and the house on Willow Street presented an opportunity to uncover the truth. Dr. Chambers was a woman of science, skeptical of supernatural claims. She believed that every paranormal phenomenon had a rational explanation, and her goal was to find it. As she entered the house, she brought with her an array of equipment: EMF meters, infrared cameras, and audio recorders. She was determined to capture evidence that would debunk the haunting claims and bring peace to the Jacobs family. But what she would discover within the house on Willow Street would challenge everything she believed in. Dr. Chambers' investigation of the house on Willow Street began with skepticism, but it quickly evolved into a battle against an unseen malevolence that defied explanation. Her equipment malfunctioned in the presence of the paranormal phenomena, and her rational explanations crumbled in the face of the inexplicable. She witnessed objects levitating, eerie apparitions appearing and disappearing, and heard guttural voices that seemed to originate from nowhere. The malevolent force within the house seemed to taunt her, mocking her attempts to rationalize what she witnessed. Dr. Chambers was forced to confront the possibility that the house on Willow Street was unlike any other haunting she had encountered. In her quest to understand the malevolent force within the house, Dr. Chambers stumbled upon an old journal hidden beneath the floorboards of the attic. The journal belonged to the previous owner of the house, a man named Elijah Blackwood. As she read through the journal, Dr. Chambers uncovered a chilling tale of a man who had become obsessed with the occult. Elijah Blackwood had conducted dark rituals in the hidden room in the basement, seeking to unlock forbidden knowledge and power. The journal described encounters with malevolent entities, cryptic symbols etched on the walls, and the gradual descent into madness. It became clear that the malevolent force that now plagued the Jacobs family was a result of Blackwood's actions. Dr. Chambers realized that to save the Jacobs family, she would need to confront the ancient evil that had been unleashed within the house on Willow Street. Dr. Chambers knew that confronting the malevolent entity that now infested the house on Willow Street would not be an easy task. Armed with the knowledge from Elijah Blackwood's journal, she gathered the Jacobs family and explained the dire nature of their situation. The entity, born from Blackwood's dark rituals and malevolent intentions, had grown in power over the years. It hungered for more than just torment. It sought to consume the souls of those who dared to reside within its domain. Dr. Chambers urged the family to leave the house, but Mark and Sarah were reluctant. They had invested their savings in the property and were determined to make it their home, despite the horrors they faced. Desperate to find a way to banish the malevolent entity and restore peace to the Jacobs family, Dr. Chambers proposed a seance. She believed that by making contact with the entity, they could learn more about its origins and weaknesses. That evening, they gathered in the dimly lit living room. Dr. Chambers, Emily, Daniel, Mark, and Sarah formed a circle, their hands touching, and a sense of unease settled over them. Dr. Chambers chanted incantations, calling out to the entity in a bid to communicate with it. As the seance continued, the atmosphere grew tense. Unseen forces seemed to tug at them, and the temperature in the room dropped. Whispers filled the air, and the malevolent entity made its presence known. Through Emily, the entity began to speak. It revealed itself as a being of darkness, born from the depths of despair and hatred. It recounted the horrors it had witnessed, the pain it had endured, and the insatiable hunger that drove it. The entity's voice was a chilling blend of agony and malice, and it taunted the family with its knowledge of their deepest fears and insecurities. It claimed to have been awakened by their presence and vowed to consume their souls. Dr. Chambers, undeterred by the entity's malevolence, continued to question it, determined to find a way to weaken its grip on the family. She knew that uncovering its vulnerabilities would be their only hope. As the seance continued, the entity inadvertently revealed its vulnerability. It confessed that it drew power from the negative emotions of those it tormented, the fear, anger, and despair that filled the house. Dr. Chambers saw an opportunity to weaken the entity. She urged the Jacobs family to confront their own fears and negative emotions, to resist the entity's attempts to sow discord among them. Over the following days, the family embarked on a journey of self-reflection and reconciliation. They shared their deepest fears and regrets, seeking to mend the rifts that had formed between them. As they faced their own demons, the entity's hold on them began to wane, and they sensed a glimmer of hope that they could free themselves from its malevolent grasp. With the entity's vulnerability exposed, Dr. Chambers devised a plan to perform a powerful exorcism that would banish it from the house on Willow Street once and for all. She gathered the necessary materials, including ancient symbols and protective talismans. The night of the exorcism arrived. The family, strengthened by their newfound unity, joined Dr. Chambers in the living room. Candles flickered, and the air was heavy with tension as the ritual began. Dr. Chambers chanted incantations and drew symbols on the walls with a mixture of salt and holy water. As she invoked the forces of light and protection, the entity unleashed its fury. The room trembled, objects flew through the air, and the entity's howls of rage reverberated. But the Jacobs family stood strong, their love and determination acting as a shield against the malevolent force. They held hands and repeated the words of the ritual, their voices growing stronger with each utterance. As the ritual reached its climax, a blinding light filled the room, forcing the entity to retreat. It shrieked in agony, its form writhing and dissipating like smoke in the wind. With a final incantation, Dr. Chambers sealed the entity within a protective barrier. The malevolent force raged against its confines, but it was powerless to break free. The room fell silent, and a sense of peace settled over the house on Willow Street. The entity's presence had been banished, and the Jacobs family had emerged victorious. In the aftermath of the exorcism, the Jacobs family found themselves transformed. The house on Willow Street, once a place of torment, became a sanctuary of love and healing. Emily and Daniel's smiles returned, and their laughter echoed through the hallways. Mark and Sarah, no longer burdened by fear and despair, grew closer as a couple. The town of Rivertown, once wary of the house, watched in amazement as the family thrived. Dr. Chambers, satisfied that her work was done, bid farewell to the Jacobs family. She knew that the malevolent entity had been banished, but she also understood the importance of remaining vigilant. As the Jacobs family embraced their new beginning, they knew that the horrors of the house on Willow Street were behind them, but they would forever carry the lessons they had learned: the strength of love, the power of unity, and the resilience of the human spirit. Although the malevolent entity had been banished, the Jacobs family couldn't escape the lingering shadows of their past. The house on Willow Street held memories of terror that haunted their dreams and lingered in the corners of their minds. Mark and Sarah decided to renovate the house, hoping that a fresh start would help them leave the past behind. They painted over the walls with cheerful colors and replaced the creaking floorboards, but the memories still lurked. Emily and Daniel had their own share of lingering fears. They continued to have nightmares of the malevolent entity, and they couldn't forget the chilling voices and apparitions they had witnessed. Therapy helped, but the scars ran deep. One day, as Mark was working on renovations in the basement, he uncovered the hidden room that Emily had discovered months ago. The symbols on the walls had faded, but the malevolent energy still hung in the air. Curiosity got the better of Mark, and he decided to investigate the room further. As he entered, the temperature dropped, and he felt an overwhelming sense of dread. The room seemed darker, as if the shadows themselves clung to the walls. Mark quickly left the room, sealing it shut once more. He couldn't shake the feeling that they had missed something, that the malevolent entity might not have been completely banished. Mark's discovery of the hidden room filled him with unease. He decided to reach out to Dr. Chambers, the paranormal investigator who had helped them banish the entity. She agreed to return to Willow Street to investigate the room. Upon her arrival, Dr. Chambers could sense the lingering malevolent energy in the hidden room. She explained to the family that the entity might have left a residual presence behind, a remnant of its dark influence. Together, they conducted a thorough investigation of the room, using specialized equipment to detect any paranormal activity. What they discovered sent shivers down their spines. Elijah Blackwood's journal, which had been missing from the attic. Dr. Chambers examined the journal with a growing sense of unease. It contained new entries that detailed Blackwood's attempts to summon the malevolent entity back into the house, even after his initial encounters with it. Blackwood's obsession with dark rituals and forbidden knowledge had led him to believe that he could harness the entity's power for his own gain. He had performed a series of sinister ceremonies in the hidden room, attempting to re-establish a connection to the malevolent force. As they read through the journal, the realization struck: they might not have banished the entity after all. It seemed to have left a doorway open, a tether to the house, and it could return with a vengeance. In the days that followed the discovery of Blackwood's journal, ominous signs began to manifest in the house on Willow Street. Shadows moved in the corners of rooms, and the temperature dropped inexplicably. Emily and Daniel's nightmares returned with a vengeance, and they spoke of a presence in the house, watching them, whispering dreadful secrets. Mark and Sarah couldn't ignore the chilling events unfolding around them. Dr. Chambers, now certain that the malevolent entity was attempting to return, urged the family to leave the house once more. But the Jacobs family, unwilling to abandon their newfound hope and sense of home, were determined to confront the malevolent force head-on. In a desperate attempt to communicate with the malevolent entity and learn its intentions, Dr. Chambers suggested another seance. They hoped to uncover the entity's weakness and find a way to seal the doorway it had left behind. The atmosphere in the living room was heavy with tension as they formed a circle once more. Dr. Chambers chanted the incantations, calling out to the entity, while Mark, Sarah, Emily, and Daniel held hands. The seance began much like the previous one, with strange sounds and eerie whispers filling the room. But this time, the entity's presence was stronger, and it seemed more determined than ever to re-enter their lives. As the seance reached its peak, a bone-chilling wind swept through the room, extinguishing the candles and plunging them into darkness. The entity's malevolent laughter echoed through the house, sending shivers down their spines. Then the room was bathed in an eerie bluish light. The entity manifested itself, its form a grotesque and shifting mass of shadows. It taunted them with its presence, promising to torment them once more. Desperation and fear washed over the Jacobs family, but they refused to yield to the entity's malevolence. They repeated the incantations from the exorcism, determined to seal the doorway and banish the entity once and for all. A battle of wills unfolded in the darkened living room. The Jacobs family, guided by Dr. Chambers, chanted the incantations, their voices growing stronger with each repetition. They called upon the forces of light and protection to aid them in their struggle. The malevolent entity fought back with all its might, attempting to disrupt the incantations and break their resolve. Objects flew through the air, and the room shook with its fury. In the midst of the chaos, Emily and Daniel, empowered by their love for their family, joined the incantations. Their voices, filled with determination, helped tip the balance in their favor. As the battle of wills raged on, the malevolent entity weakened. Its form flickered and waned, and it let out a final, ear-piercing scream before dissipating into nothingness. With a final incantation, Dr. Chambers sealed the doorway that the entity had left behind. The room fell silent, and the temperature returned to normal. The malevolent force had been banished once more. Exhausted but victorious, the Jacobs family and Dr. Chambers knew that they had faced the malevolent entity and emerged triumphant. The house on Willow Street, now cleansed of its darkness, held the promise of a brighter future. In the days that followed the sealing of the doorway, the Jacobs family found peace once more. The nightmares ceased, and the eerie phenomena that had plagued them gradually faded away. With the support of Dr. Chambers, the family embarked on a journey of healing. Therapy and counseling helped them cope with the trauma they had endured, and they grew closer as a family. The town of Rivertown, having witnessed the Jacobs family's resilience, welcomed them with open arms. The house on Willow Street, no longer a place of dread, became a symbol of hope and redemption. With the malevolent entity banished once more, life in the house on Willow Street slowly returned to normalcy. The Jacobs family, now stronger than ever, settled into their daily routines and tried to put the nightmares of the past behind them. Yet, the lingering mysteries of the unnerving new house refused to fade away entirely. Emily and Daniel, despite their newfound sense of security, couldn't shake the memories of the malevolent entity and the horrors they had witnessed. Mark and Sarah, while grateful for the peace they now enjoyed, wondered about the true nature of the malevolent force and what had driven Elijah Blackwood to summon it. Dr. Chambers, too, couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to uncover. Driven by their lingering curiosity and a desire to prevent anyone else from falling victim to the malevolent entity, the Jacobs family decided to delve deeper into the history of the house on Willow Street. They combed through old records, interviewed longtime residents of Rivertown, and visited the local library to uncover any information about the previous owners of the house. The more they discovered, the darker the secrets of the house became. They learned of other families who had lived in the house briefly, only to flee in terror. Stories of mysterious disappearances and unexplained deaths seemed to follow the house through the decades, confirming its reputation as a place of darkness. As the Jacobs family pieced together the history of the unnerving new house, they uncovered a series of disturbing events. Elijah Blackwood, the man who had performed dark rituals in the hidden room, was not the first owner to dabble in the occult. Previous owners had also tried to harness the supernatural forces within the house. It was said that the house had been built on ancient Native American burial grounds, and that the land itself held a dark and vengeful energy. Each owner had faced malevolent forces of their own, but none had succeeded in fully banishing them. The house seemed to feed on the darkness that resided in the hearts of those who dwelled within its walls. The Jacobs family's research led them to a chilling revelation. Elijah Blackwood had left behind unfinished business. His journal contained cryptic references to a ritual that could potentially release the malevolent entity once more. Fearing that someone else might stumble upon the journal and attempt the ritual, the family resolved to complete the ritual themselves. They believed that by doing so, they could permanently seal the malevolent entity's doorway and put an end to the house's dark history. Guided by Dr. Chambers' expertise in the paranormal, they gathered the necessary materials and prepared for the ritual, hoping that it would bring closure to the unnerving new house. On a moonless night, the Jacobs family, accompanied by Dr. Chambers, gathered in the hidden room in the basement. Candles flickered, casting eerie shadows on the walls covered in cryptic symbols. The ritual began with a series of incantations and offerings meant to appease and seal the malevolent entity. The air grew thick with tension as the family chanted in unison, their voices echoing through the dimly lit chamber. As they reached the climax of the ritual, the room seemed to vibrate with an otherworldly energy. The temperature dropped, and the walls themselves seemed to pulse with a malevolent presence. In the midst of the ritual, the malevolent entity manifested once more powerful and furious than ever before. It howled with rage, determined to resist the family's efforts to seal its doorway. The room became a battleground of supernatural forces. Objects flew through the air, and the walls shook as the entity fought to break free from its confinement. Dr. Chambers and the Jacobs family held fast, their determination unwavering. The ritual reached its climax, and with a final incantation, they channeled their collective willpower to seal the doorway once and for all. The malevolent entity shrieked in defeat as it was forced back into the shadows. With the ritual completed, the unnerving new house seemed to sigh in relief. The malevolent entity's presence lifted, and the dark energy that had plagued the house for decades began to dissipate. As the days passed, the house underwent a transformation. The atmosphere lightened, and the oppressive shadows receded. No longer a place of dread, the unnerving new house began to exude a sense of warmth and serenity. The Jacobs family and Dr. Chambers felt a profound sense of closure. They believed that, at long last, the house could be redeemed from its dark past. Life in the unnerving new house continued to improve. Emily and Daniel grew into happy, well-adjusted children, free from the nightmares that had haunted them. Mark and Sarah found solace in their newfound sense of security and peace. The town of Rivertown, once wary of the house, now embraced it as a symbol of resilience and redemption. The Jacobs family's journey had transformed the house from a place of darkness into a beacon of hope. Dr. Chambers, satisfied that her work was complete, bid farewell to the family, confident that the malevolent entity had been vanquished for good. She knew that the Jacobs family's courage and determination had brought an end to the house's dark history. As the years passed, the unnerving new house became a beloved fixture of Rivertown. It was no longer known for its dark past, but for the family who had faced its horrors and triumphed. Mark and Sarah, now middle-aged, had turned the house into a sanctuary for those in need. It became a place of healing and support for families who had experienced trauma and loss. Emily and Daniel, inspired by their own experiences, pursued careers in psychology and the paranormal, respectively. They dedicated their lives to helping others confront and overcome their fears. The story of the unnerving new house came to an end, not as a tale of darkness and despair, but as a testament to the resilience of the human spirit. It stood as a reminder that even in the face of malevolent forces and unspeakable horrors, love, unity, and determination could triumph. The house on Willow Street remained a symbol of redemption, a place where nightmares had turned into dreams, and where a family had forged an unbreakable bond. The legacy of the Jacobs family lived on, a beacon of hope for all who encountered the unnerving new house. John Thompson, a reclusive writer seeking inspiration, had rented a remote cabin nestled deep within the woods. The cabin was isolated, surrounded by towering pines and the eerie symphony of nocturnal creatures. As John settled into his self-imposed exile, the isolation began to weigh on him, casting long shadows on his once tranquil mind. Days turned into weeks, and John's only companions were the endless pages of his manuscript and the unsettling silence that enveloped him. The isolation was a double-edged sword. It granted him the solitude he sought, yet it also fueled his growing sense of unease. The forest seemed to hold its breath, as if waiting for something that lurked beyond the edge of perception. As the nights grew longer, John's dreams became plagued by vivid, disturbing nightmares. He would wake in a cold sweat, unable to recall the details of the horrors that had unfolded within his subconscious. The line between dream and reality blurred, and the isolation of the cabin began to gnaw at his sanity. One moonless night, John awoke to a sound, a faint whisper that seemed to originate from the depths of the forest. He dismissed it as a trick of his imagination, but the whispers persisted. They echoed through the cabin, their unintelligible words unsettling and disorienting. John felt as though the very walls were conspiring against him. The whispers grew louder, morphing into ghostly apparitions that danced at the edge of John's vision. Pale figures flitted through the cabin, their faces obscured by shadow. They whispered promises of secrets and revelations, drawing John deeper into their ethereal dance. Desperation gnawed at him as he struggled to comprehend their presence. In a hidden corner of the cabin, John stumbled upon an old diary. Its pages were filled with cryptic, handwritten entries that hinted at a dark history. The diary had belonged to a previous occupant of the cabin, a recluse who had succumbed to the isolation and the whispers that haunted the woods. The diary spoke of a malevolent force that dwelled within the forest, a force that craved company and sought to ensnare souls. John's nights grew increasingly tumultuous. He would wake to find his possessions moved, his manuscript scribbled with cryptic symbols, and his sanity unraveling. He became convinced that an unseen intruder prowled the cabin, a malevolent entity that reveled in tormenting him. The whispers grew more coherent, their voices mocking and malevolent. John's descent into madness accelerated as he grappled with the relentless presence that haunted him. He began to record his experiences in a journal, desperate to maintain a semblance of sanity. The isolation had become a prison, and the cabin felt like a malevolent entity in itself, a place where reality and nightmare collided. One moonless night, John decided to confront the entity that had tormented him. Armed with the diary and a makeshift ritual he had gleaned from its pages, he ventured into the forest, guided only by the eerie glow of a lantern. The whispers grew deafening, and the shadows within the woods seemed to coalesce, taking form and substance. Deep within the forest, John stumbled upon a clearing where the whispers converged into a cacophonous chorus. A spectral figure emerged from the darkness, its features twisted into a grotesque semblance of humanity. It revealed itself as the guardian of the forest, a malevolent entity that had ensnared countless souls over centuries. The entity taunted John, revealing that the isolation was its doing, a method to draw in souls ripe for torment. It had whispered secrets and nightmares, Feeding on John's fear and despair, it offered a sinister choice: to join the legion of tormented souls, or to become its unwitting puppet, forever bound to the cabin and the forest. With his sanity hanging by a thread, John made a desperate bargain. He offered his manuscript, a vessel of his creativity and soul, in exchange for release from the entity's grasp. The entity hesitated, its ethereal form shifting in contemplation. In a malevolent twist, it agreed, but not before extracting a piece of John's essence, a fragment of his very being. John returned to the cabin, his spirit broken and his creativity drained. He finished his manuscript, but it was a hollow, lifeless work, a reflection of the emptiness that now consumed him. The entity's whispers faded, but the cabin bore the scars of his ordeal. It stood as a haunted place, a sanctuary for lost souls forever bound to its malevolent presence. Years passed, and the cabin's legacy lived on. John, a shadow of his former self, found himself drawn back to the isolation that had shattered his life. The whispers and shadows remained, an enduring reminder of the malevolent force that had ensnared him. He wandered the cabin, a solitary figure forever tormented by the horrors that lurked in the depths of the forest and the recesses of his own mind. The isolation remained, an eternal prison for John's soul. The cabin stood as a testament to the horrors of solitude, a place where reality and nightmare intertwined. As the seasons changed and the forest reclaimed its territory, the whispers of the entity echoed through the woods, waiting for the next unsuspecting soul to venture into the depths of its dark domain. The cabin, hidden deep within the woods, became a place of legend, a cautionary tale told by those who dared to speak of it. The isolation it offered was a seductive trap, luring in those who sought solitude and creativity, only to ensnare them in a never-ending nightmare. And as the world moved on, the cabin remained a dark and foreboding presence, a place where the solitude of the mind could lead to a descent into unending horror. One fateful night, as John's torment reached its zenith, he resolved to break free from the malevolent grasp of the cabin and its entity. Armed with a newfound determination, he began to dismantle the very walls that had witnessed his descent into madness. As John tore through the cabin's interior, the entity's whispers swelled into a crescendo of rage. Shadows coalesced, attempting to thwart his efforts. But John's desperation fueled his strength, and he shattered the windows, allowing the moonlight to flood the cabin. In the moonlight, the entity manifested in its true form, a writhing mass of darkness and despair. It lunged at John, attempting to drag him into its shadowy abyss. But John fought back with a ferocity born of years of torment. He wielded the diary, invoking the same ritual he had used to make his ill-fated bargain. The cabin trembled as an otherworldly battle raged within its walls. Shadows clashed with the spectral entity, and the very foundation of the cabin seemed to quiver. John's determination was his greatest weapon, and with a final incantation, he banished the entity from the cabin. With the entity's departure, the whispers that had tormented John faded into silence. The cabin, once a place of malevolence and despair, stood empty but no longer haunted. John had paid a steep price for his freedom, but he had reclaimed his sanity and his soul. The cabin trembled as an otherworldly battle raged within its walls. Shadows clashed with the spectral entity, and the very foundation of the cabin seemed to quiver. John's determination was his greatest weapon, and with a final incantation, he banished the entity from the cabin. John emerged from the cabin, a changed man. He had survived the isolation and the horrors it had harbored. As he made his way back to civilization, he carried with him the knowledge of the malevolent force that lurked in the depths of the forest, a force that thrived on solitude and despair. The cabin trembled as an otherworldly battle raged within its walls. Shadows clashed with the spectral entity, and the very foundation of the cabin seemed to quiver. John's determination was his greatest weapon, and with a final incantation, he banished the entity from the cabin. John's experience in the cabin became the basis for his most chilling and haunting novel. It was a story of isolation and horror, a cautionary tale for those who sought solitude without knowing the price it could exact. And as the world read his words, they shivered with the realization that the horrors of the human mind could be far more terrifying than any supernatural entity. Years passed, and the cabin remained an empty and silent sentinel in the woods. It had been cleansed of its malevolence, but the memory of the horrors that had transpired within its walls lingered. The forest, once a place of solace, now held an eerie, somber resonance, a testament to the enduring power of isolation and the darkness that could lurk within the human psyche.